Slightly beyond this point, we noticed a decided increase in the number and size of the side galleries and concluded the densely honeycomb region beneath the higher foothills must now have been reached. The nameless scent was now curiously mixed together with another, and scarcely less offensive odor. Of what nature we could not guess, though we thought of decaying organisms and perhaps unknown subterranean fungi. Then came a startling expansion of the tunnel for which the carvings had not prepared us. A broadening and rising into the lofty, unnatural-looking elliptical cavern with a level floor, some 75 feet long and 50 broad, and with many immense side passages leading away into crippling darkness. Though this cavern was natural in appearance, and inspection with both torches suggested it had been formed by the artificial destruction of several walls between adjacent honeycombing. The walls were rough, and the high vaulted roof was thick with stalactites, but the solid rock floor had been smoothed off and was free from all debris. Detritus, or even dust to a positively abnormal extent. Except for the avenue for which we had come, this was true of the floors of all the great galleries opening off from it, and the singularity of the condition was such as to set us vainly puzzling. The curiously new filter, which has been supplemented with nameless scent, was excessively pungent here, so much that it had destroyed all of the trace of the other. Something about this whole place, with this polished and almost glistening floor, struck us as more vaguely baffling and horrible than any of the monstrous things we had previously encountered. The regularity of this passage immediately ahead, as well as the larger proportion of penguin droppings there, prevented all confusion as to the right course amid this plethora of equally great cave mouths. Nevertheless, we resolved to resume our paper trailing blazing if any further complexity should develop, for dust tracks, of course, could no longer be expected. Upon resuming our direct progress, we cast a beam of torchlight over the tunnel walls and stopped short in amazement at the supremely radical change which had come over the carvings in this part of the passage. We realized, of course, the great decadence of the old one's sculpture at the time of the tunneling, and had indeed noticed the inferior workmanship of the arabesques and the stretches beyond us. But now, in the deeper section of beyond the cavern, there was a sudden difference, wholly transcending explanation. A difference in basic nature as well as in mere quality, and involving so profound and calamitous a degradation of skill that nothing in the hitherto observed rate of decline could have led one to expect it. This new and degenerate work was coarse, bold, and wholly lacking in delicacy of detail. It was countersunk with exaggerated depth and bands following the same general line of the sparse cartouches of the earlier sections, but the height of the reliefs did not reach the level of the general surface. Danforth had the idea that it was a second carving, a sort of palimpsest, formed after the obliteration of a previous design. In nature, it was wholly decorative and conventional, and consisted of crude spirals and angles roughly following the quintile mathematical tradition of the old ones, yet seeming more like a parody than a perpetuation of that tradition. We cannot get it out of our minds that some subtly but profoundly alien element had been added to the aesthetic feeling behind the technique. An alien element, Danforth guessed, that was responsible for their manifestly laborious substitution. It was like, yet disturbingly unlike, what we come to recognize as the old one's art. And I was persistently reminded of such hybrid things as the ungainly Palmyrene sculptures fashioned in the Roman manner. The others had recently noticed this belt of carving was hinted by the presence of a used torch battery on the floor in front of one of the most characteristic designs. Since we could not afford to spend any considerable time in study, we resumed our advance after a cursory look, though frequently casting beams over the walls to see if any further decorative changes developed. Nothing of the sort was perceived, though the carvings were in places rather sparse because of the numerous mouths of smooth floored lateral tunnels. We saw and heard fewer penguins, but thought we caught a vague suspicion of an infinitely distant chorus of them somewhere deep within the earth. The new and inexplicable odor was abominably strong, and we could detect scarcely a sign of that other nameless scent. Puffs of visible vapor ahead bespoke increasing contrasts in temperature and the relative nearness of the sunless sea cliffs of the Great Abyss. Then, quite unexpectedly, we saw certain obstructions on the polished forehead, obstructions which were quite definitely not penguins, and turned on our second torch after making sure that the objects were quite stationary. 11. Still another time I've come to a place where it is very difficult to proceed. I ought to be hardened by this stage, but there are some experiences, intimations, which scar too deeply to permit of healing, and leave only such an added sensitiveness that memory re-inspires all the original horror. We saw, as I said, certain obstructions on the polished floor, and I may add that our nostrils were assailed almost simultaneously by a very curious intensification of the strange, pervading photor, now quite plainly mixed with the nameless stench of those others which had gone before us. The light of the second torch left no doubt of what the obstructions were, and we dared approach them only because we could see. Even from a distance, they were all quite past all harming power, as had been the six similar specimens unearthed from the monstrous star-mounded graves at Poor Lake's camp. They were indeed as lacking in completeness as most of those we had unearthed, but though it grew plain from the thick, dark green pool gathering around them, that their incompleteness was of infinitely greater recency. There seemed to be only 4 of them, whereas Lake's bulletins would have suggested no less than 8, as from the group would have preceded us, which had preceded us. To find them in this state was wholly unexpected, and we wondered what sort of monstrous struggle had occurred down here in the dark. Penguins attacked in a body retaliate savagely with their beaks. And our ears now made certain the existence of a rookery far beyond. Had those others disturbed such a place and aroused murderous pursuit? The obstructions did not suggest it, for penguin beaks against the tough tissues Lake had dissected could hardly amount for the terrible damage our approaching glance was beginning to make out. Besides, the huge blind birds we had seen appeared to be singularly peaceful. Had there then been a struggle among those others, and were the absent 4 responsible? If so, where were they? Were they close at hand and likely to form an immediate menace to us? We glanced anxiously at some of the smooth-floored lateral passages as we continued our slow and frankly reluctant approach. Whatever the conflict was, it had been clearly that which had frightened the penguins into their unaccustomed wandering. It must then have arisen nearly that faintly heard rookery in the incalculable gulf beyond, since there were no signs that any birds had normally dwelt here. Perhaps we reflected there had been a hideous running fight, with the weaker party seeking to get back to the cached sledges when their pursuers had finished them. One could picture the demonic fray between nameless monstrous entities as it surged out of the black abyss with great clouds of frantic penguins squawking and scurrying ahead. I say that we approached those sprawling and incomplete obstructions slowly and reluctantly. Would to heaven we had never approached them at all, but had run back at top speed out of that blasphemous tunnel. With the greasily smooth floors and degenerate murals aping and mocking the things they had superseded. Run back before we had seen what we did see, and before our minds were burned with something which would never let us breathe easily again. Both of our torches were turned on the prostrate objects, so that we soon realized the dominant factor in their incompleteness. Mauled, compressed, twisted, and ruptured as they were, their chief common injury was total decapitation. From each one, the tentacled starfish head had been removed, and as we drew near, we saw that their manner of removal looked more like some hellish tearing or suction than like any of the ordinary form of cleavage. Their noisome dark green ichor formed a large spreading pool, but its stench was half overshadowed by that newer and stranger stench, here more pungent than any other point along our route. Only here, when we had come very close to the sprawling obstructions, could we trace that second unexplainable floor to any immediate source. And the instant we did, so did Danforth, remembering certain very vivid sculptures of the old one's history in the Permian age 150 million years ago, gave vent to a nerve-tortured cry which echoed hysterically through that vaulted and archaic passage where the evil Olympus carvings. I came only just short of echoing his cry myself, for I had seen those primal sculptures too, and had shudderingly admired the way the nameless artist had suggested that hideous slime coating found on certain incomplete and prostrate old ones. Those whom the frightful Shoggoths had characteristically slain and sucked to a ghastly headlessness in the great war of resubjugation. They were infamous nightmare sculptures, even when telling age-old bygone things, for Shoggoths and their work ought not to be seen by human beings or portrayed by any beings. The mad author of the Necronomicon had nervously tried to swear that none had been bred on this planet, and that only drugged dreamers had ever consumed them. Formless protoplasm, able to mock and reflect all forms and organs and processes. Vicious agglutinations of bubbling cells. Rubbery 15-foot spheroids. Infinitely plastic. And ductile. Slaves of suggestions, builders of cities, more and more sullen, more and more intelligent, more and more amphibious, more and more imitative. Great God, what man has made even those blasphemous old ones willing to use and carve such things? And now, when Danforth and I saw the freshly glistening and reflectively iridescent black slime which clung thickly to those headless bodies and stank obscenely with that new unknown odor, whose cause was only a diseased fancy could emphasize, clung to those bodies and sparkled less voluminously on a smooth part of the accursed sculptured wall in a series of grouped dots. We understood the quality of cosmic fear to its uttermost depths.